My abuser, Michael Milosh, he took everything from me. So I don't have anything, really at this point.
But Alexa, are you lying? Because that's not what the court records say. That was Alexa Nikolas, former actress from Nickelodeon Zoey 101, turned activist and founder of Eat Predators. The abuser she's referring to? Michael Milosh, frontman of Rhye, the critically acclaimed music project, and her husband from 2012 to 2016. If you've never heard this story before, in 2020, Alexa Nikolas posted a 48-part Instagram series titled Groomed by the Groom, accusing her ex-husband Milosh of abuse, manipulation, and systemic silencing during and after their marriage. She later filed a lawsuit against him, making some of those same claims, but says she was forced to withdraw it due to what she describes as a lopsided and unfair divorce agreement, one she claims was orchestrated by the music industry to protect Milosh while disregarding her welfare. Alexa says that this experience, what she describes as stolen justice, enabled by a corrupt industry, is what inspired her to launch Eat Predators, a for-profit company she claims advocates for other survivors of the entertainment industry. After her lawsuit was swiftly dropped, Milosh countersued her attorneys. Her claims were emotional, intense, and widely believed. But what if I told you the court records tell a very different story? In this video, I'm going to show you the court documents that directly contradict the narrative Alexa has promoted for years. We'll examine her divorce filings, break down the mutual release clause she claims denied her justice, and walk through the lawsuit she filed and later dropped against Milosh. You'll see how an equitable, average, fair, and mediated divorce was recast as abuse, how financial support was reframed as abandonment, and how unverifiable claims became a brand. If you've only ever heard her side of the story, this may challenge everything you thought you knew. My name is Loki. I bring the storm, but today I'm forecasting uncomfortable truths with a 100% chance of seeing some crocodile tears. Before we begin, let's get those obvious accusations out of the way. Victim blaming, pushing a narrative, questioning survivors. If those labels help you dismiss this video, feel free to use them. But if you're here for truth, evidence, and the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions, welcome. You're in the right place. Now let's set the record straight. I don't know Milosh. I've never communicated with Alexa Nikolas. I'm not part of a smear campaign. I have no ties to Nickelodeon, Dan Schneider, the Deep State, former friends, alleged stalkers, or whoever the villain of the day is. I'm just someone who once believed Alexa and believed in what I thought Eat Predators stood for. I didn't set out to discredit her. I started asking questions because something felt off. And when others did, I noticed a pattern. Instead of answering, Alexa deflected. Instead of explaining, she accused. She didn't just avoid scrutiny, she punished it. That alone raised red flags. But coming from someone claiming to speak for survivors, that was dangerous. Then I noticed something else. Channels asking legitimate but uncomfortable questions began to vanish. Not flagged, terminated. And YouTube isn't supposed to punish people for bad takes. Opinions are still subjective. And advocacy built on silencing dissent is not advocacy. It's control disguised as credibility. And the deeper I looked, the more it became clear this wasn't about protecting survivors. It was about protecting a narrative. And when that narrative began to collapse under basic scrutiny, it became clear. Maybe the issue wasn't the questions. Maybe it was the storyteller. In Alexa's case, She hasn't just pointed the finger in the wrong direction, she's protected the real villain entirely. While she spent years framing Milosh as the monster, her own public court record shows something far more disturbing. Long before she met Milosh, someone much, much closer to Alexa allegedly placed her in the most dangerous environment possible at just 16. And that's the real origin story. For any survivor narrative to hold weight, it has to begin at the beginning, not from the moment it becomes profitable. There are real villains in Alexa's story. They're just not who she told you they were. And they've worked very hard to ensure their outrage looked genuine, to bury their own alleged complicity. Let that sink in. This chapter breaks down how Alexa Nikolas took a standard, mediated California divorce and rebranded it as a trauma story, then spun that trauma into a public-facing conspiracy that weaponized empathy for profit. And if you think that's an exaggeration, let's start with her version of events. Here's Alexa on Just Trish. Trish paid us his podcast in April 2024, claiming that Red Light Management, Milosh's management firm, owned by Live Nation and Ticketmaster, was responsible for inserting language into her divorce agreement. Language, she says, that absolved her ex-husband of all responsibility, including for what she now frames as childhood sexual assault. She presents this as the moment justice was stolen from her and uses it to frame the music industry as complicit in protecting abusers and prioritizing profit over the well-being of survivors.
Mediator. And I'm like, oh, it's a non-biased party who's gonna like be in there, and okay, this feels a little bit safer than just like signing a contract when Red Light's coming to my front door.
Yes.
Red Light does the introduction though to the mediator.
Yeah. I go and meet up with the mediator. Very simple. You're gonna go with your jewelry and car and money, and he's gonna go with his. Oh. Just not getting anything. Like, okay, I'm not fighting this also anymore.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I don't want to be anywhere near him. I want out, basically.
Okay. 6 months later, I get an email about a stipulated judgment. And I'm like, what the heck is this?
So then I email her back, and I'm like, what is this? And she goes, oh, you know, the stipulated judgment is just what we all agreed upon, but it's just more like legal language. I look at it, I don't see really anything at all. It's all just like, here, therefore, like, hereafter. I'm like, whatever.
And so
I'm like, okay, and I sign it, and you see the whole email exchange with me with her, and then I noticed that the stipulated judgment draft, Red Light, is like accidentally CC'd in there. When I sue him in the future for what he did to me, I get a call from my lawyer in January, and they're like, are you sitting down? Like, you definitely need to sit down. Do you remember a stipulated judgment, like the typical divorce papers you get? And they go, oh, well, in there he had you release your child essay without telling me, without anything. How is that even possible to put a crime in a divorce agreement? You know, I couldn't even believe what I was hearing, because they tricked me into releasing child essay in a divorce agreement.
I mean, how is that like legal?
It's not technically legal. It put strain on my lawyers in the sense where they never even had been in that situation before. That was like what really opened my eyes up to record labels and institutions actively covering up. They wanted those things to be released so they could protect their artist and keep touring him on the backs of me. That's not normal in divorce agreements. Then I started calling, after that happened, then I would call all of these people that got divorced, you know? And I'd be like, do you have this in your... And they went, no. And I'm like, I couldn't find one person that had that language.
No. I'll show you why that claim she made about being tricked into signing a clause absolving Milosh of sexual abuse is not just misleading, but entirely false. I'll walk you through what she actually received in her divorce. But spoiler alert, it wasn't nothing. And I'll show you how her own actions contradict the very claims she's used to build her platform. One that relies on our empathy, our trust, and our willingness to believe survivors. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If your story is real, scrutiny does not weaken it, it strengthens it. So when someone demands belief without evidence, treats basic research like betrayal or bullying, and works to suppress access to the facts. That's not transparency, it's strategy. And when someone silences dissent, not by answering questions, but by exploiting their power on platforms to get other much, much, much smaller channels terminated, that's not justice. That's weaponizing their power, which is the very thing she claims to be fighting against. As someone I once admired used to say, too many coincidences surrounding someone usually equals a plan, and it should raise a red flag. And if what they said was true, then the coincidences surrounding Alexa Nikolas wave a red flag so massive it could be seen from orbit. This video will review 3 key areas. We'll start with Alexa's public statements versus the actual divorce records. Then we'll move on to that mutual release clause she claims denied her justice. And finally, we'll review her withdrawn lawsuit and the countersuit Milosh fought against her attorneys. If you've only ever heard Alexa's side, what I'm about to show you may be difficult to reconcile. But every claim in this video is supported by public records, sworn court documents, or direct quotations. Nothing is fabricated or manipulated. All source materials are available for download in the description. And while I stand by my interpretation, don't take my word for it. Verify it. Review the documents. Research California divorce law. Because when a narrative relies on you not verifying it, that alone speaks volumes about its credibility. And that's why I'm unbothered by what people choose to call this. Also, if you're unfamiliar with Alexa Nikolas or her story, here's the short version. When I refer to Groomed by the Groom in this video, I'm talking about that 48-part Instagram series. It's still available on her Instagram if you're up for hours of scrolling and mental gymnastics. To make it easier, I've included a Google Doc with all 48 posts in order. There are also 2 videos linked below, one dissecting Groomed by the Groom and the other reviewing Alexa's organization, Eat Predators. They're both linked below, and while you don't need to watch them first, they're worth checking out if you're interested in the bigger picture. Alexa has publicly discussed her divorce from Milosh at length. It was handled via mediation in the state of California, as Alexa mentioned on the Just Trish appearance. Her narrative has always centered on the idea that Milosh had abandoned her, leaving her financially devastated. She's consistently painted herself as living in terror throughout their divorce proceedings, desperate to escape this allegedly abusive marriage as swiftly as possible, while paralyzed by the prospect of signing legal documents without proper representation. Representation, she claimed, was financially impossible, since Milosh had systematically stripped her of her resources. When mediation emerged as an option, she framed it as a safer alternative. For those unfamiliar with divorce mediation, it represents a fundamentally different approach than traditional courtroom litigation. It's typically more cost-effective, quicker, and crucially, it places equal decision-making power in both parties' hands rather than surrendering control to a judge's ruling. Mediators, however, operate under stringent ethical codes that mandate absolute neutrality. They are legally forbidden from advocating for either party. And according to Alexa, it was that guaranteed impartiality that ultimately convinced her to proceed with the mediator despite her reservations. But it would turn out, at least per Alexa, that the mediator in their divorce was anything fair. As Alexa claimed in that clip, Red Light Management, operating as a subsidiary under Live Nation and Ticketmaster, colluded to hire that mediator, who would prioritize Milosh's best interests and strip her of everything. After a mediator facilitates a divorce, they produce that stipulated judgment, the document Alexa referred to. That's what we're reviewing in detail today. And let's summarize Alexa's concerns as she laid it out in that clip. Red Light Management arranged the introduction to the mediator who would oversee Alexa and Milosh's divorce proceedings. Before executing the stipulated judgment, Alexa explicitly asked the mediator to clarify the agreement's contents. The mediator confirmed it reflected their previous negotiations. rather than reviewing the document independently or securing her own legal counsel, because again, Milosh had engineered her financial ruin, Alexa claims she signed without reading, trusting entirely in the mediator's summary. Years later, when Alexa moved to sue Milosh for alleged misconduct, her attorneys purportedly discovered the divorce settlement contained what she characterized as extraordinarily rare, virtually unheard of language that preemptively absolved Milosh of future claims, including those stemming from alleged misconduct, thereby denying her justice against her alleged abuser. This discovery allegedly compelled Alexa to abandon her lawsuit, effectively denying her legal recourse, and what motivated her to start Eat Predators. Red Light Management orchestrated the entire scheme, deploying a compromised mediator that embedded protective language shielding Milosh from future allegations that weren't even talked about during the divorce proceedings, prioritizing his revenue-generating potential through continued touring and recording over Alexa's pursuit of justice. Are we aligned on her narrative? Now let's examine the actual documentation. The stipulated judgment opens with a series of fundamental disclaimers that aren't merely ceremonial legal language. They serve as essential safeguards that enable the court to confidently approve an agreement brokered through mediation. Despite divorce mediation occurring outside traditional courtrooms, these mediated settlements still require judicial approval. Should the court detect that any of these conditions weren't satisfied, the agreement faces immediate rejection. These disclaimers carry profound legal weight, including both Alexa and Milosh proceeded without attorneys. Both were explicitly informed of their right to secure counsel at any point and consciously declined. Both Alexa and Milosh proceeded without attorneys. Both were explicitly informed of their right to secure counsel at any point and consciously declined. Both Alexa and Milosh proceeded without attorneys. Yes, I've intentionally emphasized these points through repetition, though I assure you it pales in comparison to how frequently the stipulated judgment itself reiterates them. This redundancy isn't coincidental. It's a deliberate legal safeguard ensuring neither party can subsequently claim ignorance about what they were agreeing to. Again, courts take extraordinary measures to guarantee all parties fully understand their rights and obligations throughout these proceedings. This protects everyone involved and also prevents future allegations of coercion or misunderstanding, which is precisely why these agreements undergo rigorous vetting before finalization and official recording. Legal documents are intentionally explicit and repetitive by design. Additionally, both Alexa and Milosh agreed to waive discovery during mediation. In practical terms, this means both parties declared that they weren't concealing any assets or accounts from the other. They mutually acknowledged complete transparency regarding existing assets and liabilities, agreeing voluntarily with full awareness, no external verification necessary. These documents contain zero indication of ethical violations by the mediator. Courts have a legal obligation to ensure divorces meet established standards and comply with disclosure requirements. Regardless of settlement method, whether that's via litigation or mediation, judges can and will reject any stipulated judgment deemed unconscionable, meaning grossly unfair or heavily favoring one party. Had Alexa been deceived into signing a lopsided agreement that would leave her financially devastated while enriching Milosh, no judge would have approved it, regardless of how many signatures of Alexa's appeared on the document for approval. The court would have unequivocally rejected such an imbalance. A judge thoroughly reviewed this document and found no evidence of impropriety or inequity, a crucial fact conspicuously absent from Alexa's narrative. With this foundation established, now let's move into the actual terms of the stipulated judgment. Alexa and Milosh lived in a rented apartment. Neither owned any property. Each had kept their finances separate from the beginning of their relationship, as confirmed by Alexa in Groomed by the Groom, and the agreement seems to reflect this. Alexa retained her jewelry, her artwork, her furniture, a Volkswagen Jetta owned outright, her personal bank accounts, her acting pension, and her acting residuals. Milosh retained his artwork, his personal bank accounts, sole ownership of Rhye LLC, including both its assets and debts, and his BMW that was financed. Alexa kept her career income. Milosh kept his career income. Alexa received the debt-free vehicle. Milosh got the financed vehicle. This BMW becomes another flashpoint in Groomed by the Groom, as Alexa claims Milosh once declared he'd only ever own hybrid or diesel vehicles, and used her car throughout their marriage without acquiring a second vehicle until they separated. When Milosh purchased a BMW after swearing off non-hybrid, non-diesel cars, this was used as an example of his hypocrisy and dishonesty. While that frustration is understandable after having shared a vehicle for 6 years, it doesn't equal deception. Treating it as such is disingenuous. But since that would undermine Alexa's narrative, this becomes another point of contention instead. So if they each received their career assets and had no shared property, did Alexa absorb more of the debt? Well, Alexa assumed responsibility for her personal tax liabilities from 2013 and 2014, an outstanding medical bill, and a utility bill. Milosh retained responsibility for his personal credit card debt. It's worth noting that the tax liability was hefty, but it had absolutely nothing to do with Milosh, and instead stemmed from the real villain in this story, but we'll get there. With assets and debts taken care of, the only thing possible that's left is spousal support, right? Throughout their 2-year separation preceding divorce, Alexa herself acknowledges in Groomed by the Groom that Milosh voluntarily provided around $2,000 per month. They remained separated for 26 months before the stipulated judgment formally established spousal support for an additional 15 months through August 2019, totaling $2,300 per month. Alexa formally agreed that following termination, she could not return to court requesting further support. So was this arrangement equitable? Here's the objective reality. California divorce law typically awards spousal support for half the duration of marriages under 10 years. Had Alexa pursued traditional litigation instead of mediation, a judge would likely have ordered Milosh to pay 24 months of formal support, equivalent to half their 4-year marriage. Between pre-mediation support and the formal stipulated judgment, Alexa received 41 months of support. From the separation in March 2016 through May 2018, that equals 26 months at around $2,000 per month would be a grand total of $52,000. Through the stipulated judgment, she received an extra 15 months at $2,300 per month, which would equal $34,500, for a grand total of $86,500. Or if the figure in the stipulated judgment was just a continuation of the $2,300 he had been giving her, that would equal $94,300. Once more, in the interest of complete fairness, Alexa and Milosh didn't technically finalize their divorce until 2018, though the judgment retroactively marked their marriage as ending in 2016, which was the year they separated. So even if you count the full duration of their relationship instead of what's on paper, had Alexa pursued traditional litigation through the court, the maximum she would have received would be 36 months, which is 3 years and not almost 4. Obviously, I can't speak for everybody, but I would assume most reasonable people would not consider 41 months versus 24 or even 36 unfair, nor $85,000 instead of $55,000 unjust, and nor would they characterize more than $85,000 as nothing. Alexa walked away with 35% more than she would have through standard divorce proceedings, yet somehow, in her narrative, she was left destitute and abandoned. This isn't merely mischaracterization, it's deliberate reality inversion. When Alexa claims she received nothing, she actually obtained significantly more than California law would have mandated. When she portrays herself as financially devastated, she was actually benefiting from an arrangement far more generous than most divorcees receive. And when she suggests the mediator favored Milosh, the documented terms reveal precisely the opposite, a settlement granting Alexa substantially more than a judge likely would have awarded. The contrast between Alexa's public claims and legal reality couldn't be starker. One represents a carefully crafted narrative designed to evoke sympathy and outrage. The other is a sworn legal document telling a vastly different story, one of reasonable division, generous support, and mutual agreement. The question isn't which version we prefer to believe, but which one is actually supported by verifiable evidence. And now we reach what I consider the most crucial element of this stipulated judgment, that devastating mutual release of claims. The section where, at least according to Alexa, Milosh essentially admitted wrongdoing by including such specific language, releasing him from responsibility tied to her alleged abuse. We've already heard her version on Just Trish, but here she is again, this time on her own platform, Eat Predators, describing just how devastating that portion of the divorce agreement was for her. And pay attention, not just to what she says, but how she says it. The calculated fury, the contempt, the indignation dialed up just enough to seem raw, but not out of control. And of course, the dramatic, drawn out pauses between each word. I've kept the beginning intact so you can hear the tone for yourself, but I've cut the clip down from 3 minutes to 1. Not because I'm hiding anything or trying to deceive you, but because I'm not here to waste your time with forced theatrics. I don't need to stretch silence to make a point, and I don't need to weaponize emotion to make you feel something that isn't there. You are capable of hearing the words and deciding for yourself without being spoon-fed outrage disguised as truth.
You know what Live Nation did to me? Live Nation, in my opinion, covered up my child's essay. They have a company called Red Light Management. At first, I was so focused on Milosh because he is the person who did it all to me. And then while I was in the middle of my lawsuit against him, I had to find out that Red Light was covering up my child essay in a divorce agreement. These huge major corporations should never be involved in personal matters. They're not supposed to be involved in criminal cover-up. But Red Light Management was. But I'm talking about how these institutions are a part of covering up child essay in a divorce agreement.
So now let's examine where her ex-husband, or Red Light, forced Alexa to absolve Milosh of childhood sexual assault or grooming in their agreement. We'll search for grooming, then minor. How about childhood? Sexual? That's fascinating. Absolutely nothing in this document contains those terms whatsoever. So where is the language that prohibited Alexa from pursuing justice? I'll cut the crap. I've obviously thoroughly reviewed these documents before recording. So, the crucial word throughout this entire discussion is civil. Why? Because the only claims someone can legally waive against another person are civil claims. Criminal allegations, such as sexual assault or grooming, can never be signed away because that authority belongs exclusively to the state. No contract, no NDA, nothing can relinquish the state's right to pursue criminal charges against an individual. Think of civil claims like personal debt owed to you. If someone damages your property, they owe you compensation. You have several options: demand the full payment, negotiate a settlement, or forgive the debt entirely. That choice is all yours. You can pursue what you're legally entitled to, or you can waive those rights. Criminal proceedings, however, are like taxes owed to the government. Nobody can sign away the government's right to collect what it's owed. Even if you personally don't want to pay taxes, that's not your decision to make. When most people say they were robbed of justice, they're referring to an inability to hold someone accountable through the criminal justice system. But when Alexa discusses justice, she's actually referring to financial compensation. Because, in Alexa's framing, justice and financial restitution allegedly appear closely linked. The reality is unambiguous. Civil agreements cannot and do not interfere with criminal investigations. If credible evidence supports her allegations, the receipts and proof she claims to possess, absolutely nothing prevented her or prevents her from pursuing criminal charges. Civil claims address one thing exclusively: money. And that is precisely what Alexa relinquished: the right to sue Milosh for money. Now, whether she framed it as emotional difficulties, psychological harm, or material deprivation, she signed away her right to use anything as grounds for demanding compensation. And that's not injustice, it's just fundamental contract law. But perhaps you're giving Alexa the benefit of the doubt, naturally wondering why Milosh would even include such specific language absolving himself of serious allegations if he never committed them anyway, regardless of whether it's civil or criminal. And like you're about to hear Trish Paytas say to Alexa, isn't the inclusion of this language essentially proof of guilt?
Having that even in there just shows guilt, right? Like, that just shows
why is
the
it in
criminal.
there?
Yeah.
I think most of us would probably agree with Trish's assessment. So why mention such things in a contract if those allegations were baseless? And the answer is simple: it didn't. Nothing in this contract references such specifics. It merely states that Alexa cannot later make accusations against Milosh, against anything, to extract more money from him. To publicly suggest that this contract contains language specifically absolving him of serious allegations represents such a flagrant mischaracterization that it's difficult to comprehend how anyone could reach that conclusion in good faith. And here's another critical aspect Alexa consistently omits. This was a mutual release, the operative word now being mutual. This agreement protects Alexa exactly as much as it protects Milosh. When Alexa misrepresents this mutual release by claiming Milosh forced her to sign away her ability to hold him accountable for the alleged misconduct, it's the equivalent to Milosh publicly claiming that Alexa manipulated him into surrendering his right to hold her accountable for financial misconduct, emotional abuse, relationship difficulties, infidelity, or attempted extortion. If Milosh had announced that Alexa had robbed him of his ability to hold her accountable for any of those things, would that not constitute an egregious misrepresentation? He could wave this same agreement around saying, "Look, she made me sign this. She forced me to sign an agreement waiving my right to pursue justice against the person who committed infidelity." That's the twisted leverage inherent in a mutual release. It shields both parties from future accusations, regardless of their veracity. And let me illustrate how this mutual release actually benefited Alexa. During their 2-year separation, Alexa worked on her creative project titled Metanoia, which Milosh financed entirely. Somewhat ironically, her colleague on this project, Michael Rhye, would become one of the people with whom she was allegedly unfaithful during her marriage to Milosh. Alexa consistently argues that infidelity against an abuser shouldn't inspire guilt, which apparently justifies her multiple affairs, not just with Michael Rhye, but allegedly others as well, because naturally, her partner bears responsibility for her infidelity. That's a level of responsibility shifting that would be impressive if not so concerning. But back to the point. Had Metanoia achieved commercial success, as Alexa presumably anticipated, this mutual release would have prevented Milosh from suing her for a share of profits from a project he paid for. And as a side note, Michael Rhye is now Alexa's husband. Let that sink in for a minute. Anyway, the whole point here is that this mutual release protected Alexa's interests as much as Milosh's. I'd imagine Alexa was also particularly grateful when she realized that mutual release of claims is why Milosh couldn't name her in his malicious prosecution countersuit, which he filed after her baseless lawsuit was withdrawn. But that's why Milosh could only sue her attorneys and not Alexa herself. But more on that later. Finally, the way Alexa characterizes this mutual release is that it's so extremely uncommon. So rare, in fact, that her attorneys had supposedly never encountered such a situation before. Remember, she allegedly contacted everyone she knew who had divorced, and she couldn't find a single person whose agreement contained that language either. The truth? While mutual releases are not standard in divorce agreements, they are present in 70 to 80% of mediated divorce settlements. To call her representation misleading would be generous. It's an outright fabrication. So to reiterate, nothing prevents Alexa from pursuing criminal justice. The agreement only prohibits Alexa from suing Milosh for money. And these agreements aren't rare, they're common. And crucially, the agreement protects Alexa as much as it protects Milosh. Now, to be scrupulously fair in my representation, unlike certain approaches, I don't enjoy manipulating audiences, so I'll acknowledge the reality here. Based on my research, the mutual release in their specific agreement is extremely detailed, far more specific than average. Obviously, I'm not privy to private discussions between Milosh, Alexa, and their mediator, nor do I know any of them personally, but I can reasonably speculate about why theirs is so meticulously detailed. Imagine you married someone like Alexa and spent 6 years with her. One day she announces she wants to separate, so you remain separated on and off for another 3 years. During those 3 years, she blames you for her multiple infidelities. When you suggest finalizing the divorce, she accuses you of pressuring her and bullying her. When you respectfully disagree with her, she claims you're threatening her. You've witnessed her transform every mistake she's made into being your fault. Would you be honest with your mediator about this? Would you instruct them to use standard boilerplate language like most divorce agreements, or would you request extraordinarily specific provisions anticipating that she might continue the manipulative behavior you've endured for almost a decade? If she's this vindictive before the divorce, what might happen after? Especially if you're an artist who might eventually achieve overdue commercial success. You recognize that your wife prioritizes money above all else, and she's even admitted that nothing you provided ever satisfied her. You've agreed to 3.5 years of support instead of the standard 2, yet she still portrays you as leaving her destitute and homeless. If she's this aggrieved now, what happens when spousal support finally concludes? Wouldn't you proactively protect your potential future assets? I strongly suspect Milosh included such specific language precisely because he anticipated Alexa might manipulate their marital history to extort additional money from him. And rightfully so. His foresight proved accurate. How Alexa fails to recognize that the provision's inclusion was specifically to prevent her from later doing exactly what she attempted to do, and then portrays that preventative measure as unfair, while being blocked from executing the very scheme he anticipated, is beyond comprehension. For Alexa to characterize this as unfair is laughable. Yes, he likely instructed the mediator to use precise language protecting him from future manipulation by someone who would weaponize anything once she no longer received financial benefits. In his position, Wouldn't you have done the same? And here's the tragic irony, which brings us to the next segment about her 2021 lawsuit against Milosh. Despite having enough foresight to protect himself against someone who manipulated him for almost a decade, despite remaining amicable during divorce proceedings to ensure the process was as fair and smooth as possible, while also insisting on specific protective language, despite correctly anticipating her vengeful actions once financial support ended, it still didn't prevent her from filing a civil lawsuit. The provision protected him from financial liability if the case were to proceed to trial and result in a guilty verdict, but it didn't prevent her from filing. Yes, even with all those protections, she still did it. She still chose to wreak havoc. I personally suspect her plan all along was to file that suit and withdraw it quickly, but we'll explore that in the next chapter. To summarize the key aspects of this mutual release, they cannot grant criminal immunity, and theirs didn't either. There's no mention whatsoever of specific serious allegations or immunity from prosecution in any form. Their clause, just like the rest of them, pertain exclusively to civil claims, disputes about money, not crimes. Criminal prosecution remains within the state's authority. No private agreement, including a divorce settlement, can eliminate someone's right to pursue criminal charges. And nothing in this judgment, then or now, prevented Alexa from reporting any alleged criminal behavior to law enforcement. That right has always remained hers. And to summarize the divorce agreement, the stipulated judgment between Alexa and Milosh resulted from mutual mediation, after both parties proceeded without attorneys by choice after being fully informed of their rights. The division of property and debts was straightforward and equitable. Alexa received substantial spousal support exceeding standard expectations based on the marriage's duration. Both parties released each other from future civil claims. No provision restricted Alexa's ability to report alleged criminal behavior to law enforcement, either during or after their marriage. And the stipulated judgment reflects a standard legal resolution, not a conspiratorial cover-up or silencing mechanism. So now that you fully understand the actual terms of their divorce,
I had to find out that Rhye was covering up my child essay in a divorce agreement. Michael Milosh, he took everything from me. So I don't have anything, really, at this point. But I'm talking about how these institutions are a part of covering up child essay in a divorce agreement.
do you recognize the emerging pattern here? The chasm between her online portrayal and the legally binding reality isn't just substantial, it's virtually impossible to bridge. And as we progress, you'll see that divide only expands further. The contrast between documented reality and public narrative could not be more jarring. When someone's story fundamentally contradicts legal documents they themselves signed under penalty of perjury, you must ask yourself, what represents the more reliable source? Sworn statements made under oath with legal consequences for falsehood? Or inflammatory social media posts strategically crafted for maximum emotional and sympathetic impact? Earlier in this chapter, we addressed the reasons why someone might discourage people from verifying their stories or dissuade them from digging deeper into the actual facts. Does it now make crystalline sense why one might dare to employ that strategy in this particular situation? When your public narrative is built on fundamental distortions of easily verifiable legal documents, the last thing you want is an audience that fact-checks your claims. When you've characterized receiving over $80,000 in spousal support as getting nothing, when you've described a mutually beneficial agreement as a one-sided silencing mechanism, when you've portrayed standard legal language as unprecedented conspiracy, you absolutely cannot afford to have people examining the actual evidence. And that's precisely why we see the consistent discouragement of independent research, the warnings against victim blaming when people ask for documentation, and the framing of fact-checking as complicity with alleged abusers. It's not about protecting vulnerable people from harassment. It's about protecting a carefully constructed narrative from scrutiny that would immediately expose its fundamental dishonesty. The most effective way to maintain a false narrative isn't to create better lies. It's to convince your audience that seeking the truth makes them complicit in harm. When someone tells you that verifying their story is morally wrong, that looking at court documents is betraying survivors, or that asking for evidence is enabling abuse, they're not protecting anyone. They're protecting their ability to manipulate you. And this isn't merely a case of differing perspectives or selective memory. We're witnessing a systematic distortion of verifiable facts, where documented reality gets completely rewritten to serve a narrative. Every major claim Alexa makes about her divorce, from being left with nothing to being silenced about alleged abuse, crumbles under the weight of actual evidence. And the question becomes, if she's willing to so dramatically misrepresent legally documented facts that can be easily verified, what does that suggest about claims that can't be independently corroborated? When someone demonstrates such a profound disconnect between their public statements and sworn legal testimony, it fundamentally undermines their credibility on all fronts. And this pattern of reality distortion isn't accidental, it's calculated. And as we'll discover, it extends far beyond their divorce proceedings into every aspect of her public accusations. Despite Alexa claiming that she never received any support or money from the divorce, that stipulated judgment told us that her spousal support was set to end definitively in August 2019. And here's what Milosh did. After that, he still kept helping her financially. Yes, despite that legally binding agreement that said he owed her nothing more beyond that date, he still gave her more. How do I know this? Because Milosh's lawsuit, the one Alexa never expected anyone to read, details it in black and white. And yet, when did Alexa suddenly realize she'd been abused? Not during the marriage, not during the separation, not during the financial support. It was after he finally said no. The moment the money stopped, the trauma started. Apparently, the abuse was retroactive and conveniently timed. So once the money stopped coming in, she gathered up her mountain of evidence against Milosh and went straight to the police. Just kidding, that never happened. Instead, on March 16, 2021, Alexa released her Groomed by the Groom expose on Instagram. And as I was digging through court records, something stood out. In what Alexa called her final episode of Eat Predators in September 2024, she launched into a tirade against former NBC journalist Kat Tenbarge. Not just for daring to investigate the origins of Eat Predators and being critical, but for failing to acknowledge something she framed as deeply significant: the fact that Alexa's alleged stalker filed court paperwork on her birthday. According to Alexa, this detail should have been so glaringly obvious that overlooking it amounted to incompetence, because apparently her birthday is supposed to carry the weight of a nationally recognized holiday.
Didn't you find that strange, Kat? That he filed that, dated that, on my birthday?
So when I noticed that Alexa released Groomed by the Groom on March 16th, the exact day she married Milosh 9 years earlier, I paid attention. Based on that lesson I learned from Alexa, symbolic dates aren't coincidences, they're choreography. And this wasn't a spontaneous outpouring of truth. It was a performance, timed, polished, rehearsed. And Alexa wasn't just the narrator, she was the choreographer. But let's move on. Before Groomed by the Groom dropped, Alexa gave an interview to Verse magazine while still separated from Milosh. In Groomed by the Groom, she admits she intentionally left out details in that interview because she didn't want to jeopardize the financial support Milosh was still giving her. Yet she still insists this was never about money. But you can't redact your story for a payout and then claim moral clarity. You don't get to edit for profit and call it justice. That only works if you're writing fiction, and this becomes important shortly. 6 months later, still no police report. Instead, on August 25th, 2021, she filed a civil lawsuit. Now, we've already established her divorce agreement didn't prevent her from suing, but that mutual release clause, that common clause designed for closure, not cover-up, prevented her from taking the case to trial or seeking monetary damages. And that's what led to its dismissal. Some may argue that this lawsuit was about justice. I'd argue it was about something else entirely. But first, let's look at what Alexa actually alleged. Sexual battery, gender violence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of the California Tom Baines Civil Rights Act. At the center of all four claims is the accusation that Milosh began grooming Alexa at age 16, and this is where her narrative collapses. Across interviews, social media posts, and legal filings, the story of how she first encountered Milosh shifts so drastically it borders on fantastical. In Groomed by the Groom, she says a friend introduced her to his music while she was filming a movie in Iowa. In verse, that friend became a boyfriend. But in her lawsuit, the document where she's legally required to tell the truth, that friend morphs into her adult legal guardian and chaperone. That's not a minor inconsistency. It's a complete narrative overhaul. According to the lawsuit, the person who introduced her to Milosh wasn't a peer. It was her guardian. What the lawsuit omits, but her other accounts confirm, is that this legal guardian was also her boyfriend. A boyfriend her mother, Alexa Nikolas, seemingly and allegedly handed full custody to when Alexa was barely 16. And this boyfriend, based on public posts and dates Alexa herself provided, he was reportedly born in 1967, which would make him 40. So yes, you heard that right. Alexandra signed over parental rights of her just-turned 16-year-old daughter to a 40-year-old man. And that man wasn't Milosh. It was someone else. Someone neither Alexa nor Alexandra has ever named publicly. Even if this man wasn't 40, you can't sign over custody of your minor daughter to her boyfriend if he is still a minor. So let's be honest, even if he was just 18, it was still hugely inappropriate. And it gets worse. In both Groomed by the Groom and verse, Alexa says this same guardian gave her hallucinogens while she was filming, 6 times the standard illegal dosage. Alexa describes a vision where a tree began speaking to her, telling her that the voice she was hearing in the song would one day be her husband. This is what prompted her to reach out to Milosh via MySpace immediately. But in the lawsuit, no drugs, no trees, no visions, just a sanitized version where a wide-eyed teen innocently messages a musician she admires and never expected a response. And that erasure matters. It whitewashes the role of the actual adult in power, the one who drugged her, dated her, and had full legal authority over her because Alexandra gave it to him. And also proves that Alexa absolutely did not just reach out to him innocently without expecting a response. What happened to the arboreal prophet who told her this would be her husband? And this wasn't a lapse in Alexandra's judgment either. Signing away custody of a child to their boyfriend, 25 years their senior, is either abandonment or willful facilitation in something far darker. And years later, this same mother feigned outrage, sending Milosh an email expressing disgust that he responded to a MySpace message from her daughter, which was then used to boost their credibility in Groomed by the Groom. But this was a daughter she'd already handed over to a man almost a decade older than Milosh. So that's not outrage, that's misdirection. Because if Alexandra had done her job as a parent, or if her daughter's adult boyfriend had done his job as her guardian, Alexa never would have been in a position to message Milosh in the first place. And no, that's not victim blaming, because I'm not saying Alexa put herself in that position. I'm saying her legal guardian, And the mother who entrusted Alexa's well-being to that legal guardian absolutely did have the obligation to protect her. When Alexander screams grooming, it's not indignation, it's projection. Milosh, in Groomed by the Groom, makes a claim that suddenly makes sense in this context now too, that Alexandra left Alexa at age 16, not just emotionally, but physically and financially, including tax penalties from her failure to file taxes for Alexa while she was still in the custody of her adult boyfriend. That claim, once brushed off, now fits. And the tax debt that Alexa was left with in their divorce agreement, that fits too. So when critics start connecting the dots, what's the response? Accusations of victim blaming, accusations of supporting abusers or being paid off. It's not a defense, it's a threat, a warning. Don't ask questions or you're complicit in abuse. But let me say this plainly. Alexa is a victim, just not of the man she sued. The person who allegedly created the environment that led to her exploitation was not Milosh. It was allegedly her mother and the man her mother empowered. And that is devastating, because it finally makes sense why Alexa clings so tightly to her pain. She's still trying to reclaim it, and I truly hope she finds peace. But peace requires truth, and you can't seek justice while protecting the people who actually failed you. Now back to the lawsuit. As I mentioned, Alexa gave that verse interview first, followed by Groomed by the Groom, which she then called her full truth. Nothing omitted, no details spared. Yet major allegations in the lawsuit are nowhere to be found in Groomed by the Groom. For example, Alexa claims in the lawsuit that Milosh spent those 2 years, from when she was 16 to 18, repeatedly requesting explicit photos. But in Groomed by the Groom, those years were described as flirtatious and not explicit. She included messages about art, message, and only one suggestive line in Groomed by the Groom that she sent to him, saying they could hang out but just not touch. And Milosh's response? It was omitted. Then suddenly that whole exchange vanishes from the lawsuit. Why? Did Milosh shut it down? Did Milosh set a boundary? We'll never know because it's been erased. Alexa's suit then brought up Milosh's response to a photo Alexa sent him when she was 16 or 17. And Milosh replied with something like, "Oh my, that's hot." And since I'm being fair, this was the most compelling point for me in this suit that proved the grooming. I couldn't think of a single context where that wouldn't be inappropriate. But stick with me, because you'll see when I review Milosh's suit next chapter why the allegation ended up being squashed. But spoiler alert, context is hugely important to this one, and in Milosh's suit, it'll all make sense. What doesn't make sense is Alexa's own definition of proof. In Groomed by the Groom, she presents neutral texts, often months apart, as smoking guns. If she had stronger evidence, she would have used it. She didn't hold back to protect Milosh. She held nothing back at all. She went so far as to describe their adult intimacy in graphic detail, not to prove grooming, but to humiliate and to trigger salacious headlines that cast Milosh as a monster. And that's the real issue. Alexa insists she's proved her case with receipts, but the receipts don't show abuse. They show contradiction. If anything, she knew the evidence in Groomed by the Groom was too flimsy to stand on its own, so she relied on what wasn't said, leaving strategic gaps for you to fill in, so you do the heavy lifting and connect the dots that she couldn't. So could her lawsuit still be true? Yes. Could Groomed by the Groom or verse be the real version instead? Also yes. But they all contradict each other. They're not different angles, they're different stories. And that means at least one of them is a lie. That alone points to a pattern of strategic dishonesty. And it's not just speculation. Remember, Alexa herself admitted that she omits information during the verse interview to ensure Milosh kept sending her money. And that's not evidence of trauma, that's evidence of manipulation. The pattern is consistent. Rewrite the story for new audiences. Omit what weakens the narrative. And weaponize outrage to silence questions. Most people would instinctively sympathize with a child. Most people would sympathize with a mother claiming to protect their child. But no one, absolutely no one, would extend that same grace to a woman who had already signed over custody of her freshly turned 16-year-old daughter to the 40-year-old man she was dating. That is complicity in grooming. So to then act shocked when that daughter messaged a guy with a even smaller age gap, please, if that's your moral compass, it's spinning wildly. So here's the truth. If the lawsuit is true, then groomed by the groom and verse are false. If groomed by the groom and verse are true, then the lawsuit is false. Alexa admits to selective omission. That's not accountability, it's strategy. She may regret Milosh, but blaming him for what her mother did, or for what her legal guardian did, isn't just dishonest, it's unforgivable. Alexa's next allegation was also missing from Groomed by the Groom. Now she claims that after turning 18, Milosh pressured her into excessive drinking and non-consensual acts during their first in-person meeting in Berlin. Alexa turned 18 in April 2010 and flew to Berlin in June to spend a week with Milosh, at least depending on which version she's telling. In both Groomed by the Groom and verse, that trip was a week. In the lawsuit, it's now changed to 2. But either way, in both Groomed by the Groom and verse, that trip was framed as consensual. She describes inner conflict about intercourse in Berlin, but ultimately gave consent. It wasn't coercion, it was regret. So where was the alcohol in any of those accounts? The only prior mention of drinking was years later, when Milosh allegedly raised concerns about her alcohol use during their marriage. Now suddenly, alcohol appears retroactively, reframing a consensual act into a predatory one. Why? Because alcohol changes the perception. It turns what she previously described as complex consent into assault. This isn't nuance, it's narrative inflation, conveniently timed to coincide with legal action. It's about retrofitting the past to fit the lawsuit and not about healing. Alexa later alleged that Milosh took explicit photographs of her to use as cover art for his albums. She claims in her lawsuit that during a listening party, both she and her mother were so disturbed by the pornographic imagery that they left the listening party in disgust. But here's the problem. They didn't attach the cover art to the lawsuit, and that omission is telling. If this were a valid claim, they would have shown it, but they didn't because they knew it wouldn't hold up. Instead, they relied on the power of a headline, counting on the public to absorb the accusation without ever checking the source. Because if you do look at the photo, one thing becomes instantly clear. These are not pornographic images. They're stylized, tastefully shot, and fully within the bounds of what's common in music and art. And while consent can be withdrawn in personal relationships at any time, you can't retroactively revoke consent over published art owned by a record label. Milosh can't just take them down. He likely doesn't even own the rights. So ask yourself, if the truth was strong enough to stand on its own, why hide the evidence? In her lawsuit, Alexa next alleges that repeated non-consensual acts, emotional coercion, and audio recordings of her saying no were used in Milosh's music. She claims this was a pattern, but in Groomed by the Groom, she described one instance, once. And yes, once is more than enough if it were true, but this isn't just implausible, it's provably false. Her most sensational claim hinges on a linguistic myth, that Milosh reversed audio of her saying no to intercourse so it sounded like on, and then used it in his album. But that's physically impossible. Reversing no doesn't produce on, phonetically or audibly. It sounds like won a contest or the number 1 and not on. Anyone with audio software can verify this in under a minute. No, 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 no. Ho on. And yet this falsehood became one of the most widely repeated claims in Alexa's narrative. Reposted, reframed, reblogged, never questioned. Back to the lawsuit. Now she claims these kinds of recordings happened multiple times and were used in a 2013 album. Yet she stayed with Milosh until 2017 and remained in contact until their divorce was finalized in 2019. So if that music had truly been a violation, why support him on tour? Why stay for years? Yes, trauma is complex and delayed realization happens. But this type of abuse, the kind involving a reverse-edited no, would spark immediate horror. Instead, the timeline contradicts her claim. Had her prior statements been consistent, benefit of the doubt might apply. But the inconsistencies are too large, too many, and too strategic. The picture is not just fractured, it's collapsing. Alexa then goes on to claim that Milosh's label and PR team knew or should have known about the abuse and failed to intervene. And this is where logic truly falls apart. Alexa previously said companies shouldn't meddle in personal matters.
These huge major corporations should never be involved in personal matters.
But now she's arguing that record labels had a duty to insert themselves into her personal relationship. Alexa herself admits Milosh didn't even get the record label deal until after they were married, which we'll get into shortly, but that alone makes her expectations impossible. She's now claiming teams should have intervened when she was 16, yet the contract she's blaming them over didn't exist until she was 19. How exactly were they supposed to intervene 3 years before their professional relationship even started? There's zero evidence that any label or management team ever saw inappropriate messages. And even if they had, there's no legal obligation for a label to monitor the personal lives of their artists, let alone their romantic relationships. And let's not forget, Alexa didn't meet Milosh in person until she was 18. So what exactly did she expect these US-based teams to do? Call the Berlin police to report an adult man was messaging a 16-year-old in another country 3 years prior? Distasteful? Sure. But illegal? No. And logistically, a transatlantic intervention over a private online relationship was never going to happen. And even if she expects them to have had a duty once they found out that they began speaking when she was still a minor, how would the record label call the police and say, hey, one of our artists just told us that he messaged a girl when she was a minor? Here's the irony. She places more blame on record labels than on her own mother, or the adult guardian who held legal custody over her. Record labels aren't guardians, but her actual guardian was. And if Alexa holds Milosh's team responsible, then by her own logic, her mother and legal guardian are complicit. Yet, they're absent from this lawsuit. And that's not an oversight, it's strategy. Because this isn't about justice, it's about selective retribution. Alexa also claims Milosh only married her to obtain a U.S. artist visa, based on an email she says she found in his inbox while snooping around. That email supposedly said that he would lose his record contract if he didn't secure a visa. But here's the problem. He didn't have that contract until after they were married. If marriage was a visa scam, why didn't Milosh leave her the moment it was secured? Why didn't Milosh file for divorce? He didn't. Alexa did. Milosh stayed until Alexa walked away many years later. She also alleges that she financially supported him while he isolated her from friends and family. But the facts tell a different story. Milosh again funded Metanoia, her personal project, and he paid spousal support for over 3.5 years for a marriage that lasted just 4. She even admitted this on Just Trish.
So he got $1 million record deal 6 months after I got married to him. So
Okay. I guess in a weird way, you're kind of like he's supporting you now and you're not supporting him.
yeah, but it left me desolate.
And while we're at it, let's talk about that so-called $1 million record deal. Alexa's banking on the fact that most of her supporters are not familiar with how the music industry works. She's hoping they'll assume Milosh was handed $1 million in cash, like he could just write her a check for half. But that's not how record deals work. They're essentially structured like loans, not payouts. And that $1 million figure, it's usually broken into several installments. For example, it could be $250,000 at signing, $250,000 for the first album, and so on. And none of it is free. Artists have to pay it back through royalties before seeing a dime of profit. And more importantly, that money does not go straight into your pocket. It has to cover recording costs, which include studio time, producers, engineers. It has to cover music videos, marketing, promotion, tour support, living expenses, and cuts for your lawyer and manager right off the top. Many artists with $1 million deals end up in debt. So framing that contract as a personal windfall or paycheck, it's deceptive, misleading, and exactly what she's counting on you not to question. And this also explains why Rhye LLC was specifically mentioned in their stipulated judgment to include its assets and debts. That means there is a debt with Rhye. Finally, Alexa claimed that Milosh's team pressured her into signing away her legal rights during mediation, implying coercion, manipulation, or deception. But there's no evidence of this. The mediation wasn't secretive or one-sided. It resulted in generous spousal support, even with a mutual release clause that protected both parties equally. Alexa agreed to it. She signed it. And it wasn't buried in legalese. It was part of a stipulated judgment, reviewed and approved by the court. But let's entertain that claim, that Alexa was deceived into signing away her rights, and that this unjust agreement is the core of her lawsuit. If that's true, then the mediator, the person responsible for ensuring fairness, comprehension, and consent, would be the logical first person named in the suit. And yet, the mediator isn't mentioned at all. She sued Milosh, the person who didn't write the agreement, didn't facilitate the mediation, and had no control over the legal terms she agreed to. And that omission isn't just telling, it's damning. If the legal process itself was the harm, then leaving out the person who directed that process reveals again the real motive. Not justice, retribution. Milosh, for his part, honored the agreement, and when he finally responded through the legal system, he didn't sue Alexa. He sued her lawyers for malicious prosecution. Why? Because they knew the case had no legs, and that contrast speaks volumes. Their inclusion of the stipulated judgment in the lawsuit proves something critical. Alexa's attorneys knew about the mutual release of claims, and that matters a lot. Let me explain what I mean by this. Alexa's attorneys referenced this awfully unfair stipulated judgment from their divorce multiple times in the lawsuit, but what they didn't do is attach the judgment as evidence, and that's both highly unusual and indicative of their motives, because any attorney operating under even the most basic ethical code knows that a mutual release bars them from filing the very lawsuit they filed. It's not a gray area. It's not debatable. It's black letter law. So why didn't they mention it? Because acknowledging that clause would have been a written admission that they had no legal right to proceed, and that they knowingly defied the rules they swore to uphold. So what did they do instead? They played dirty. They used omission as a shield and bet on plausible deniability. By referencing that judgment, but quietly omitting the release, they made it harder for Milosh's team to prove what they already knew. This lawsuit should have never been filed. It was careful, it was calculated, and it was sleazy. But above all, it was strategic. The goal wasn't justice, it was spectacle. File the suit, grab the headlines, brand him a predator, then quietly withdraw before a single claim ever has to be proven in court. This is what it looks like when the legal system is used as a weapon, not to seek truth, but to manufacture it. Alexa's team used the legal system like a megaphone, and Milosh used it like a scalpel. This was never about flawed mediation. It was about manufacturing a public reckoning before Discovery could dismantle Alexa's house of cards. And that brings us to what's arguably the most important detail of all, the evidence. But before we get to what's missing, let's talk about what wasn't. Alexa's lawsuit includes explicit graphic descriptions of consensual intimacy, details that had nothing to do with grooming, assault, or establishing a legal pattern of abuse. And Groomed by the Groom, it's even more graphic. So why include any of these? It's simple. To humiliate Milosh and generate a wave of salacious headlines. And now, with stunning irony, what has Alexa recently pivoted to advocate against? Revenge porn. Now let me be clear, while there may not have been images or video, what Alexa did by sharing those intimate graphic details served the exact same purpose. She exposed someone's private sexual details to the public in vivid, damaging details, not to prove abuse, but to humiliate and punish Milosh for finally saying no to writing her another check. If the roles were reversed, no one would hesitate to call it out. This is narrative revenge, and it might not be technically illegal, but it's performative, and it reveals what Alexa's priorities are and why someone like Alexa has absolutely no business advocating for anything until she holds herself accountable for having done the same exact thing she claims to be fighting against. What she's done here isn't just shameful and disgusting, it's hypocritical to the nth degree, and I am absolutely floored by the gall of this woman. And now let's talk about what should have been there in the lawsuit but wasn't. When someone files allegations as grave as Alexa's, grooming, sexual assault, hidden recordings, industry complicity, you expect compelling truth. And while complaints don't have to prove a case at filing, at least not in California, it's common for plaintiffs to attach selective evidence that signals the strength of their claims. And we will have evidence of what that looks like when we review Milosh's lawsuit shortly. Alexa didn't do that. Her exhibits were sparse, vague, and in some cases, demonstrably misleading. The so-called proof included 5 pieces of evidence. A theatrical email Milosh sent to his adult girlfriend Alexa when she was 18. A message to Alexa's paramour. A routine mediator introduction email reframed as manipulation. And finally, the last 2 pieces, a civil breakup exchange. An email Alexa sent Milosh and Milosh's composed reply. No threats, no coercion, no abuse. Absolutely none of it supports her core allegations. None of it proves grooming, assault, or deception, which leaves us with 2 possibilities. Her legal team could have been holding the real evidence for discovery, or there was no real evidence, and the lawsuit existed purely to drive headlines, destroy Milosh's reputation, and help Alexa build her platform and brand. And obviously, I believe it was the second, because we know her legal team had seen that mutual release clause and knew the case was unwinnable. But they filed it anyway, knowing it would be dismissed, just to generate a wave of support, clicks, and sympathy. It was all a publicity stunt, not a legal tactic. Every one of Alexa's claims rests on reframing, sometimes exaggerating, sometimes omitting, sometimes rewriting the past entirely. The lawsuit didn't clarify her story, it reconstructed it for maximum emotional impact. And while some of the claims are unverifiable, others are provably false. And the ones that remain, while theoretically possible, are drowned by the pattern of strategic deception. When a story relies on selective memory, contradictory timelines, provable lies, and manipulated language, it stops being testimony and becomes strategy. And when that strategy obliterates someone's life without due process, without evidence, and without consequences, we should not mistake that for justice. We should call it what it is: reputational warfare. Fiction is activism, and a weaponized campaign that turned a courtroom into a stage. And the rest of us, we've been the audience, applauding Alexa's deception as bravery, right on cue. After Alexa's lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed with no discovery, no trial, and no explanation, Milosh made a rare move for someone accused so publicly and so explosively. He fought back, but he didn't retaliate on Instagram or in the press. He responded through legal filings, sworn, signed, and submitted to a court of law. While Alexa's narrative was crafted for social media engagement, Milosh's was drafted for judicial scrutiny. One side sought public sympathy, the other sought documented truth. And again, Milosh didn't sue Alexa directly. Bound by that mutual release clause in their divorce agreement, he honored it. Instead, he sued her attorneys for malicious prosecution, but a claim that carries one of the highest legal burdens imaginable. To succeed, Milosh had to prove the lawsuit wasn't just meritless, that it was knowingly meritless, filed without probable cause, and driven by malice. Not carelessness, not exaggeration, malice. His suit argued exactly that Alexa's attorneys filed a case they knew was barred by the divorce agreement, omitted critical documents, and pursued it anyway for attention and pressure, not justice. And in doing so, they didn't just stretch the truth, they trampled the rules. At the center of this was that stipulated judgment, the document that included the mutual release of claims. That judgment, referenced several times in Alexa's original lawsuit, was conspicuously not attached to the filing. Milosh's team alleged this omission was a calculated move. By not submitting the agreement, Alexa's attorneys preserved their ability to later pretend they didn't know it barred the suit. But any competent divorce attorney knows a mutual release prevents exactly that kind of retroactive litigation. The omission wasn't just sloppy, it was strategic. Milosh, meanwhile, upheld the very contract they tried to sidestep. He followed the rules and channeled his response toward those legally responsible, her attorneys. In contrast to Alexa's vague and highly emotional allegations, Milosh's complaint came armed with specifics, point-by-point rebuttals backed by digital receipts. Those under-duress photos that Alexa claimed she was coerced into taking, they were still visible on her public Instagram account, including glowing captions written by her. The reversed audio allegation that Milosh used her saying no and flipped it onto on for an album track, this was addressed with a counterclaim that the idea of attaching a microphone to Alexa originated from Alexa herself. And that "you look hot" message, implied to be predatory, was revealed to be a literal response to a photo of Alexa wielding a flamethrower in the middle of a cornfield on the movie set for Children of the Corn. Spousal support, while contractually ending in 2019, allegedly continued far beyond that date, an act of goodwill that had absolutely no strategic advantage to fabricate in a legal filing. His team even referenced that first interview, pointing out how, post-separation, she was still singing his praises in this interview. As a reminder, this was the interview Alexa says she omitted truths from to ensure Milosh kept sending her money. And then there was the allegation that he married Alexa solely for the U.S. visa. They didn't take too much time with this one, simply pointing out that it was just untrue. As a musician, he was frequently traveling between the U.S. and Canada. These weren't speculative defenses. They were direct refutations grounded in timestamps, screenshots, and financial records. Alexa's attorneys produced no discovery in response to Milosh's request in their suit. None. And as the deadline approached, they just voluntarily withdrew it. No fight, no defense, just silence. But Milosh, on the other hand, anticipated discovery and welcomed it. His countersuit was not designed to make headlines. It was designed to invite examination, and that's the difference. Because when one party dodges discovery and the other prepares for it, you learn everything you need to know about who's telling the truth and who's telling a story. Despite the evidence and legal arguments Milosh brought forward, the court dismissed his claim under California's anti-SLAPP statute. This law, designed to protect free speech in matters of public interest, was used to shield Alexa's attorneys from liability, even though the lawsuit had been withdrawn and never tested in court. But the court didn't say Milosh's claims were false. It just said that they couldn't meet the extraordinarily high standard required to penalize someone for filing a lawsuit, even one with no merit, unless malice could be proven with absolute certainty. As a result, Milosh was ordered to pay $5,000 in attorney's fees. Not because he was wrong, but because the system doesn't punish someone for trying to rewrite history, unless they do it with an incriminating email in hand or a spoken admission. And Alexa walked away with no consequences, despite making those explosive allegations, evading discovery, and abandoning her own case. Milosh, who followed the law and honored his divorce agreement, was penalized for trying to clear his name. The symmetry couldn't be more broken. One filed a lawsuit with no case, the other filed a defense with no chance. One manipulated public outrage, the other obeyed the rules, and still lost. Even after voluntarily dismissing the lawsuit, Alexa kept the performance alive, reassuring her followers that she would refile, even though she knew her divorce agreement made that impossible, and we'll talk about this shortly. It wasn't a legal pursuit, it was a narrative strategy. Because again, the goal was never justice, it was perception. The court filing was just a prop. The headlines were the real endgame, and it worked. Nothing is impossible, but Alexa Nikolas' story isn't just improbable, it's implausible. So layered with contradictions, omissions, and retrofitted timelines that it collapses under its own weight the moment you stop feeling and start thinking. And maybe that's the point. Her narrative was never built to survive scrutiny. It was built to survive sympathy. In a culture where emotional resonance trumps verification, the more dramatic the claim, the less proof it seems you need to make it. No one is victimized by this many people across this many stages of their life without ever leaving a credible trail. Unless, of course, they're not the target. They are the architect. If you need to call me a victim blamer for pointing that out, go ahead. I know I'm not. But I'm more than willing to accept whatever label helps you dismiss my points instead of confronting something uncomfortable. Because what truly deserves scrutiny isn't just Alexa. It's the damage she's done to advocacy, to survivors, and to public trust. By conditioning her audience to equate criticism with bullying and skepticism with hate, she didn't just protect her narrative, she insulated it. And that's not advocacy. It's authoritarianism with a trauma filter. We've walked through her company, Eat Predators. We've dissected Groomed by the Groom. We reviewed the divorce filings she rebranded as a lawsuit. We examined the lawsuit she filed and quietly withdrew. And we broke down the countersuit Milosh filed, not against her, but against the lawyers who weaponized her story. And what emerged wasn't justice denied. It was truth deliberately abandoned. Because when facts become optional, truth doesn't just disappear. It becomes a casualty of sentiment. And worse, it becomes a tool. My opinions are undoubtedly subjective, but they're rooted in objective analysis from publicly available documents, sworn legal filings, and Alexa's own words. No spin, no conspiracy. Frankly, the only conspiracy here is how far removed her narrative is from the documents she hoped no one would read, and the statements she hoped people would forget she made. This wasn't about one bitter breakup. This wasn't a dysfunctional relationship gone wrong. It was a coordinated campaign. Reframe legal agreements as coercion. Redefine mediation as manipulation. Replace discovery with storytelling. And count on your audience being too empathetic to check. This was the activist crusader, the rebranded survivor, the ex-wife rewriting her divorce into a documentary. Not for justice, but for visibility, monetization, and leverage. Because if this had truly been about justice, she would have welcomed discovery. Instead, she avoided it. If this had been about the truth, the lawsuit would not have been legally barred the moment it was filed. And if this had been about survivors, she wouldn't have spent more time monetizing her trauma than proving it. She didn't want her day in court. She wanted her day in the spotlight, and she got it. And still, after voluntarily dismissing her lawsuit, after providing zero discovery, after filing claims she knew she couldn't legally prevail, she still continued to publicly say she would be refiling her suit against Milosh. She repeated this long after the court documents made it clear that she couldn't, because narrative, not legality, was the metric that mattered, and because any negative aspect in Alexa's life is someone else's fault and never her own. And when Kat Tenbarge asked the obvious follow-up question, when would she refile? Alexa answered in her final Lead Predators episode in September 2024, not with clarity, but venom.
None of your fucking business.
And that was the moment the mask slipped. The narrative faltered, not because of critics, but because someone finally asked a question that wasn't pre-approved. And I think that moment changed a lot. Alexa has spent years condemning anyone who defends the accused, then hires the attorney who represents the most vile predators she claims to fight against. And to be clear, I believe everyone is entitled to legal defense, but I've never protested lawyers and publicly condemned them for defending people. Alexa has, lots of times. So you can't publicly vilify lawyers for defending predators, then hire the one who defends the most, and expect no one to care. Apparently it's unacceptable to support due process, unless that due process benefits Alexa directly. Suddenly, a lawyer's disturbing client list doesn't matter. Why? Because now he's representing her, a self-declared survivor. It's hypocrisy in its purest form. One's past is fair game for protest, unless their presence serves Alexa personally. That kind of logic isn't just indefensible, it's manipulative. And the indignation is palpable. Instead of understanding the criticism and attempting to explain it, she lashes out. She vilifies those who scrutinized her story, then doubted a minor whose accuser pled guilty, while doxing that minor's private information and trauma, even though that girl had nothing to do with Alexa's drama. She's painted herself as silenced while building an entire platform where no one else gets to speak. She cries about bullying while bullying survivors, disabled content creators, and wielding her power against them to try to harm their livelihood. She can do it all, no questions asked, and when her loyal supporters beg for clarification, they become villains then too. And this has always been about public manipulation, not survivor advocacy. Milosh wasn't erased, he was used, first as a partner, then as a punching bag, and finally as a foundation for a platform he never consented to support. He didn't countersuit a trend, he didn't drop merch, he didn't change his bio to falsely accused. He didn't start channel memberships or a Patreon account to claim to advocate. He filed a legal complaint against her lawyers and not her, because they helped hijack a system that was never intended to serve as a PR weapon. Milosh followed the rules, and the rules failed him. But ask yourself this honestly. If a man did this to a woman, would we call it advocacy or abuse? Would we excuse the contradictions as trauma or name them for what they are, lies? If a man released explicit details outlining moments of intimacy under the guise of awareness, we would not applaud his bravery. We'd call it what it is, trauma porn, because that's what it is. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't serve the exact same purpose. Alexa doesn't get a pass just because she's a woman. As women, we've fought too hard for equality to let someone like her weaponize our gender. Equality means accountability, and using sex as a shield to dodge scrutiny isn't progress. It's just regression dressed as empowerment. Alexa has taught the internet that performative victimhood can be a career, that if you cry loudly enough, no one checks your math. But here's the reality. Discomfort is not misconduct, suspicion is not evidence, and retroactive regret is not abuse. There is no message, no testimony, nothing that proves Milosh behaved inappropriately before Alexa turned 18. The most frequently cited evidence consists of a cryptic flamethrower photo and a suggestive message allegedly sent by Alexa, with no reply from Milosh ever shown. At best, what we're left with is a brief interaction between an adult musician and a teenage fan. Morally questionable, yes, but not illegal, not predatory, and certainly not proof of grooming or abuse. Her anger may be valid, but the person who actually groomed Alexa, the adult entrusted with her care, and the person who gave her to him, has somehow escaped all scrutiny, and that alone should raise serious red flags. And if we're now setting the bar for guilt at responded to a teenage fan and later entered into a consensual adult relationship, then we're entering dangerous territory. Because morally questionable is not the same as criminal, and it's not the same as abusive. And it does not retroactively rewrite a legal consensual relationship into a crime scene. Milosh has, by all accounts, been in a mutual adult relationship for years now. He's not chasing teenagers. He's not out reliving past dynamics. He's just trying to move on while being dragged back into a narrative that keeps shifting every time the facts don't fit. If Alexa's inconsistencies are explained away as trauma, why is Milosh's consistency viewed as manipulation? If we're being fair, fairness has to cut both ways. Milosh deserves the same evidentiary standards we'd demand if their roles were reversed. And the second we abandon that principle, we haven't just failed one man, we've failed every survivor whose credibility depends on the strength of their claims and not the volume of their voice. This wasn't just an influencer meltdown, it was a warning. Milosh's story is a cautionary tale of how quickly reputations can be destroyed by lawsuits that were never meant to be litigated, only believed. And how, despite the progress we've made, there are still women like Alexa who are willing to throw all that brave progress away for selfish benefit. Milosh didn't lose in court. He lost in the court of public opinion, against a strategy designed to win by default, a campaign that didn't have to prove anything. It only had to delay long enough for people to stop looking. If we care about justice, we have to care about due process. If we care about survivors, we must protect their credibility with standards. And if we care about truth, we have to apply the same scrutiny to the stories we want to believe as the ones we don't. Because if we let narrative override evidence, we're not just compromising justice, we're weaponizing it. When I started this project, I expected exaggeration. What I found was something more dangerous: performance activism, perfected. Alexa never wanted justice because there was no injustice to avenge. What she wanted was currency. Real survivors do not reenact trauma for clicks. They don't mock disclosure. They don't hide behind edgy slogans and ripped off logos. And they don't dodge every opportunity to prove their claims. Alexa didn't expose a broken system. She broke it even further and exploited it. Milosh, by contrast, didn't retaliate. He filed a claim, followed the law, and even kept helping her financially after that spousal support ended, until he finally said no. And then what happened? That no is when Alexa had her revelation. Not after a crime, not after a trauma, when the money stopped. So ask yourself, is this what justice looks like? Or a grudge dressed up as a movement? Milosh is the victim here, and Alexa has worked harder to ensure no one would say that out loud than she ever has to help any real survivors. Alexa Nikolas had a choice: tell the truth or tell a better story, and she's chosen wrong. every single time. She screamed about accountability while refusing to accept a shred of it for herself. And that alone proves she has no business weaponizing the language of trauma for profit, clout, or the spotlight. If you're a survivor, or if you care about survivors, open your eyes. Mark my words, Alexa will be back, maybe with new branding, maybe with a new cause, maybe with some new villains. But one thing is certain, it will be centered around her. Because for Alexa, activism isn't about helping others. It's a mirror. It's never been about survivors. It's never been about justice. It's always been about her. And if she truly cared about survivors, she would not continue advertising benefits on a platform that's no longer active, funneling donations under false pretenses. She would have shut it down responsibly, directing support to real organizations doing real advocacy. But she didn't, and that tells you everything you need to know. That's not care, that's not advocacy, it's theft from her most loyal supporters. And instead of thanking them, she's exploiting them. Instead of appreciating them, she's laughing all the way to the bank as she cashes their checks. As for me, I don't know whether I'll make another video about Alexa. This might be the end of that chapter, but I'm not done telling stories that matter. So if you have ideas, topics, names, causes that you think deserve attention, I'm here. As long as there are people watching, I'll keep digging. Unless, of course, Alexa succeeds in getting my channel terminated as she's done for others. Because that's the kind of person she is. The kind who doesn't just want criticism silenced, she wants critics erased permanently. And if you don't know how YouTube works, let me be clear. If your channel gets terminated, you lose the right to ever monetize on the platform again for life. That's not advocacy, that's vengeance. And even the lowest of low do not try to destroy someone's livelihood just because they didn't like being questioned. So follow me on other platforms I've set up in the event that happens. And even if we fundamentally disagree on every single point, if you've made it this far, I truly appreciate it, and I thank you so much for your support. Until next time, take care.